Thank you, Donald. Good evening, everybody. Well, what a day. What a mess. What a circus. What a farce. It's carry on Brexit. Now, to help me through the timelines of this morning, because most of you would have been at work and doing sensible things, but Westminster was all in a tiz. Will she, won't she? And joining me is LBC's political editor, Theo Usherwood. Theo, even I'm confused as to what the timelines were this morning. Help me.
It has been quite a day, Nigel. Good evening. At 8:10, the Environment Secretary, Michael Gove, went into a radio studio and he was asked, would the meaningful vote go ahead tomorrow at 7 p.m? And he repeatedly said that, yes, it would. So we thought, right, we're on for tomorrow night. We then had the daily lobby briefing with the Prime Minister's deputy spokesman. Actually, it's usually the spokesman when it's in the morning, but he was already in a conference call with Theresa May and members of her cabinet. First question we asked at just after 11, is the meaningful vote going ahead? Yes, we are told. It was asked again. It was asked 3 times.
So all very straightforward.
Every time, the deputy spokesman for the Prime Minister insisted that the vote was going ahead. We walk out of the meeting at 11:30. At 11:31, we start looking at our phones and ping, 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 ping. What's happening? Bloomberg News is reporting from one source that the vote has been called off. Then, of course, we all start to go through our contacts and speak to people, and more people get it stood up that in actual fact that Bloomberg's right, the vote's being called off. Ollie Robbins is then pictured, he's the chief Brexit negotiator on our side, leaving Brussels MIDI Eurostar terminal on his way presumably to meet his counterparts to reopen potentially the negotiations before Theresa May stands up in the House of Commons at 3:30 and confirms that the meaningful vote has indeed been called off, and she said that she's going to go back to Brussels to seek assurances about the Irish backstop. What's interesting, though, about the comments, and she was repeatedly asked on the detail, is that she's only going to seek assurances. She's not going back because it's been ruled out, and it was ruled out at lunchtime by the European Commission. She's not going back to reopen the withdrawal agreement, because of course Brussels has said that is not going to happen, both Donald Tusk and Jean-Claude Juncker.
I mean, given that she was going to lose this vote, and some estimates were by as much as 220 votes.
Yes.
So, she's in huge trouble. In your opinion, even if she gets assurances around the Irish backstop, they won't be legally binding, presumably, because they won't be
It'll be contained within the political declaration.
Right, okay, so they won't be legally binding. Has she got any chance of getting this deal through?
She just needs to play for time. She needs to hope for a game changer of an event or something that can actually change the narrative in her favour.
She could push this on. I mean, under the Brexit legislation, under the EU Withdrawal Act, she could push this on, could she not, to the 21st of January?
In actual fact, because she's already given a statement on the political declaration, the House of Commons Twitter feed has already said actually she could push it all the way to March the 28th. So that's been superseded. So we could, according to the House of Commons, have a vote 24 hours from Brexit about whether to leave. But just don't feel too despondent from your point of view, Nigel, because of course if she loses that vote on the 28th of March, presumably we get that far,
then we leave with no deal. No, I understand that. And Theo, finally, I know that Jacob in this carry-on Brexit looked a bit like Charles Hawtrey when he stood outside St Stephen's Gate and called for the 48 letters, and it didn't happen. But presumably she comes back from Brussels on Friday, having achieved nothing particularly concrete. Surely we're at the moment where there has to be 48 letters.
It's a very good question. The ERG, the European Research Group, of which Jacob Rees-Mogg is chairman, is meeting right now in Committee Room 12 in the Palace of Westminster. If they're looking at this and trying not to see a repeat what happened at the beginning of last month, when of course Jacob Rees-Mogg walked out of the same ERG meeting, same committee room, down the steps and to St Stephen's Gate said, let's all, over the top we go to try and challenge the Prime Minister. They need to try, from their point of view, of making it and ensuring the optics aren't all about it being a coup from the Brexiteer side. They need to bring in the likes of Bernard Jenkin and Ian Duncan Smith, people who aren't maybe sympathetic and may attend the ERG meetings, but who didn't think it was who didn't think it was suitable to challenge Theresa May directly, but wanted the legislation to do it, and see legislation fail, and then Theresa May would go on her own volition.
Well, we'll see. Theo, thank you, and don't go on holiday anytime soon. So at 3:30 this afternoon, after this farce that Theo's just described, where it was sort of will she, won't she, and in the end it seemed that the press knew before some of the cabinet what was actually going on. Theresa May stood up in the House of Commons today at 3:30 and talked about the Irish backstop.
The fact that the hard-won peace that has been built in Northern Ireland over the last 2 decades has been built around a seamless border. And the fact that Brexit will create a wholly new situation. On the 30th of March, the Northern Ireland border will for the first time become the external frontier of the European Union's single market and customs union. Does this House want to deliver Brexit? If the House does it want to do so through reaching an agreement with the EU? If the answer is yes, and I believe that is the answer of the majority of this House, then we all have to ask ourselves whether we're prepared to make a compromise.
Well, there we are. She's off to Brussels, and this is what she's going to be seeking on Thursday night.
I will go to see my counterparts in other member states and the leadership of the Council and the Commission. I will discuss with them the clear concerns that this House has expressed.
She's after assurances, and she re-emphasised it.
I still believe there is a majority to be won in this House in support of it if I can secure additional reassurance on the question of the backstop. That is what my focus will be in the days ahead.
So that's twice. Once she said assurance, now she said reassurance, then she does it again.
I have listened, I have heard those concerns, and I will now do everything I possibly can to secure further assurances.
Further assurances. And she does it again.
I am determined to do all I can to secure the reassurances this House requires.
There we are.
To get this deal over the line and deliver for the British people.
So she's going to go and seek assurances and reassurances. But of course, she does have one huge potential card to play, and that is we could leave with no deal. That'll get him sitting up and thinking, but here's what she said about that.
Be upfront that in the short term this would cause significant economic damage to parts of our country who can least afford to bear the burden.
So let's get this right. She's not going to threaten them with anything, but she's going to ask for assurances and reassurances. What a complete and utter waste of time. And then, right at the end of the speech, she said the one thing that makes me understand why this whole thing is such a humiliating failure.
And even though I voted Remain, from the moment I took up the responsibility of being Prime Minister of this great country, I've known that my duty is to honour the result of that vote.
Duty. It's her duty to honour the vote. She didn't vote for it. She can't even bring herself to say she believes in it or wants it or thinks it's good for the country. It's just her duty. And we've heard this language ever since that speech in Florence last year, and that is why this is such a dramatic failure. What assurances do you want from the Prime Minister? 0345 6060 973. I'm heading to the west coast of France to speak to Adrian, who lives in Nantes. Good evening, Adrian.
Good evening, Nigel. I want the UK to accept that this process has come to an end and that the red lines that Theresa May laid down have funneled the negotiations into a cul-de-sac that we cannot get out of, and it's time for the United Kingdom to respect both the result of the referendum but also the narrowness of the result of the referendum, and we should immediately go back to the European Union and say that we wish to take up the offer of remaining in the European Economic Area after we leave in March, and that we should make an application to rejoin the European Free Trade Association and remain within the European Economic Area. That is a deal that the European Union offered us some 18 months ago. It is a deal that keeps us fully engaged with the economies of Europe, but without keeping us in the political pillar of the European Union. So we'd be outside the political structures of the European Union, outside of the CAP, outside of the CFP, but we would be able to trade freely with the European Union.
One slight problem with that, Adrian. One slight problem with that, which is that we were promised in that referendum debate that voting to leave meant leaving the single market. We were promised the same thing again in the general election. So, number one, it's a breach of promise. And number two, it would mean continued free movement and continued acceptance of European law.
Okay, so you've raised 3 points there. Do you promise to allow me to just explain to you why that is not the case? The first point is...
If you can, I'll be fascinated, yeah.
Okay. Right, okay, so the first point is that you raised was the issue of the promises.
Yep.
Well, you yourself said during the European Union referendum campaign, not least of all of the spectator debates at which I was present, well, you said, what's wrong with Norway? It's the perfect example of a free, rich and independent, your word, independent European state that's outside of the European Union. So the second issue that you raised...
Well, the Norwegians, Adrian, the Norwegians twice voted not to join the EEC and then the EU, and were then betrayed by their politicians who pushed them into the EEA. But I'm pleased to say there's now a campaign to get out of that. And the point I was making was Norway is doing better than we are because they've got the fish. From what I can see, we'd finish up like Norway without the fish.
Okay, well, 66% of the Norwegian population in the poll in September 2017 said that they did not want to join the European Union, but they were happy with their arrangement inside the European Economic Area. The second issue is that... Right, hang on, let me finish, because you promised you'd let me. The second issue is that the government published a white paper about 12 weeks before the referendum campaign where it outlined 3 potential models for a future relationship with the European Union. One was based on the European Economic Area. The other was based on a free trade...
No. Adrian, I'm going to stop you there. Every single major player on both the Leave and Remain side said leaving means leaving the single market.
Yeah, well, what somebody said in an election campaign is not what binds the government. I'm talking about what the government said, because the government has taken the responsibility of delivering Brexit, not stronger in.
And what about free movement, Adrian?
Okay, well, free movement can be dealt with to a degree, not completely, but to a degree by triggering Article 112 of the EEA agreement, as Liechtenstein has done, which, as you will know, will trigger a conference between the contracting parties of the EEA agreement, which will then lead to, hopefully, a protocol that will ensure that the European Union respects the fact that the United Kingdom, for reasons that it alone can judge that it has the right to...
It's not good enough. It's not good enough. It's not clear enough.
I'm afraid it is clear.
Adrian, this is a Remainers Brexit, isn't it? EEA is a Remainers Brexit.
Well, I voted Leave, Nigel.
You did? Okay, and why do you want to... Why would you accept then if you voted Leave? Our laws being made somewhere else?
But they're not made somewhere else. The European Union will not be able to affect the United Kingdom other than through the 21%, I think, was your figure, or was it 19%, Nigel? I can't remember what you said. But it was the figure that you gave, which is the percentage of the EU acquis that is within the European single market. And that is mainly, I think you said at the time yourself, global standards and global regulations that we would have to abide by.
Oh, yeah. Adrian, I understand the argument. I know there is some support. There is some support for Norway in the House of Commons. I still think that it is too much of a breach of promise, both in the referendum and the general election. But hey, it's a point of view. It's gaining some ground. You're listening to the Nigel Farage Show here on LBC at 16 minutes past 6, and time for the news headlines with Lisa Aziz. March us up to the top of the hill and tell us we're going to have this vote tomorrow, and it's, everyone says, the biggest, most important parliamentary vote for perhaps over 70 years. Then today, amidst chaos, one moment telling us the vote's going ahead, the next saying it's cancelled. It is cancelled. She gives us a statement. She's going back to Brussels. Well, I thought, here's the golden opportunity. Go and say to Barnier and the boys, no backstop, or there is no deal. And watch German and French industry and Italian industry squirm and shout at their leaders, come to an arrangement, otherwise we'll be hurt. Oh no, that's not what we got. What we got were that she's going to go there and seek assurances and reassurances about the backstop in the hope she can tell us it'll be time limited. But none of it will be legally binding whatsoever. My view is not only is this deal dead, I cannot believe now, given this level of national humiliation, that there will not be at least 48 letters in by this weekend. Goodness, I hope so. What assurances do you want? Tanya from Mitcham says, can I get assurances and reassurances that Theresa May will be gone by the end of the week? Oh, I hope so, Tanya. On Twitter, Toby says, I want the assurance of 48 letters sent in to the 22 committee. Nigel, this is now the signature moment of a government in terminal decline. There can be no recovery. Her survival is her priority, not the primacy of Parliament, less to the interest of the people. Democracy has become a disgrace, and I didn't even vote for Brexit, says Kevin. Simon on Facebook says, the EU will not change the withdrawal deal, so let's have a people's vote. Well, Simon, some will argue that, but I would remind you, we had the people's vote. We know the result. And Paul says, going to Brussels is a waste of time. The EU will not give her anything, let alone a chocolate biscuit. What does Paul, a new caller from Worthington, think? Paul, what assurances do you want from Mrs May?
Oh, I'd love her to stand up and say I'm leaving, but it's never going to happen. Honestly, I think the whole thing's... I think we've been stitched up by the Remain. I really, really do. We've got a parliament full of Remainers.
Yes.
Right from the beginning, giving away our money, giving promises. It's an absolute nonsense. There's no sense. They're just mindless idiots. They really are.
But a strong Prime Minister, Paul, a strong Prime Minister could have stood up to this.
Oh, absolutely. A bit of Churchillian backbone, you know, to sort of stand up and saying, this is what the public has voted. We are a democracy. This is what the people have decided. This is what must happen. But, oh, no, she just gone about the whole thing, you know, strong and stable nonsense. That's what she is.
So you, Paul, simply want her gone, yeah?
She's got to go. We've got to have a Brexiteer in charge.
Yep.
I mean, I voted leave because I can see Europe crumbling over the next, 10 years, if that. There won't be an EU for us all to squabble. I
agree with you. I agree with you.
We've got to get out now, and what we are governed, and the people in Parliament, they listen to all these big businesses, the CBI. All they look at is their 1 year in front, and what they're going to pay out on their returns and everything else. But none of them look long-sighted. None of them can look into the distance because they're not paid to. They're not all their massive £1 million salaries. They don't give a monkey.
Paul, can I ask you
about the little man? Yes.
Can I ask you, Paul?
Oh, I'll try and calm down. Sorry.
No, I mean, are you angry to the point you want to get out there and vote again? Are you angry?
No. I'm a Democrat. We voted. We've taken the vote, but the problem is it's been stolen from us by the clowns in Parliament, who haven't got a clue what they're doing.
And how would you feel, Paul? How would you feel if at the end of all of this, a second referendum was forced upon you?
I would be fuming, Nigel. How would you feel?
Oh, I'm not going to use the word on air. It's too early.
No, absolutely.
Paul, I'm with you. I'm with you, and I think millions feel like it. Thank you for the call. Tina says, thought this deal was non-negotiable. Now she's rushing back to Brussels. Well, Tina, they've all said in Brussels it's non-negotiable. But it's okay, Tina, because she's seeking assurances and reassurances. What a complete and utter waste of time. Rick says Theresa's fumbling to try and find a way to justify holding a second referendum. Well, if that's true, Rick, she will split her own party in the most extraordinary way. Lawson says members of Parliament are guilty of ignoring the will of the electorate. They've been doing that since day one. I think Jean's got it right. What an absolute shambles. It is. Carry on Brexit. Diane is calling from Bexhill and is a new caller to the show. Good evening, Diane.
Hello, Nigel.
So what do you want to hear? When she comes back on Friday, what assurances do you want to hear?
I don't think she can give any assurances, to be honest. I think we knew what we were voting for. Project Fair didn't work. All the predictions were wrong by all the main, you know, the Bank of England, everybody, the civil service were not prepared for the result. Mm-hmm. And I don't think... We've just been betrayed, and I think the majority of people are very, very angry. Very angry.
So is there nothing, Diane, she can say to you that
I don't think so, no, because she's lost our trust. We knew she was a Remainer. We knew she was on the fence. We knew that actually she didn't fill a cabinet full of people that were strong Brexiteers, did she?
No, she didn't. And you know, you've got your own MP, of course, in Bexhill.
Yeah, but the thing is, we've got our own MP. And he's angry about that because the majority of people did actually vote to leave. Now, he's a party man. You know, we've been down to see him and we said, look, are you going to vote as a representative for the people in your constituency, or are you going to vote the party line?
So, Diane...
We will vote the party line, and I think...
Diane, you're angry with him...
And I'm angry with it all. I'm angry with him because he's not our representative, because he doesn't actually represent the majority of the people in his constituency. I'm also angry that we've had this only true democratic vote, and it hasn't been honoured.
No, Diane, there are more battles to fight. Thank you for your call and for your passion. Tristram is calling from the Isle of Man. Good evening.
Good evening, Nigel. Donald Tusk has just tweeted, "We will not renegotiate the deal, including the backstop."
Yeah. So what is the point of her even going to Brussels?
There is none. All she's going to do is get a flea in her ear and be told to come back here and get them to pass the deal. They're not going to do that. There is only one decision, executive decision, that can now be made, and that is to leave without a deal. Now, she's not going to make it. She cannot clinically make a decision.
And yet she rubbished that, Trist. I mean, that was the thing to me that amazed me in that speech. That the one threat she had to take to the table on Thursday, she effectively threw away in the House of Commons today.
Yeah, I don't think she understands, or Parliament understands, the nature of the British people. Above all, we want our democracy respected. If she respected our democracy and left without a deal, we would take a bit of pain even if that happened, but ultimately we would respect it, and I think genuinely that would happen. The problem is, the only thing that's going to shift this impasse is a new Tory leader, so I hope we get those 48 votes for the 1922 committee.
So do I.
But the question is, who would the Tory party elect? Because I understand the MPs generally remain, the party membership is generally leave
yep.
and would vote Boris. So they've got to put somebody in to make a decision. Now, how are they going to do that? Because I don't think the party would vote for Boris, but I think they should. If it's not Boris, I mean, heaven help us if it's somebody like Amber Rudd. I mean, they've got to put somebody in place who will show executive leadership, make a decision, cut through the rubbish, be ruthless, and get out of it.
Is it, Tristan, is it too late to say Brexit, or could somebody with decisive leadership still pull this out of the bag?
The legislation has been passed. They have jumped through all the hoops to leave. We've had the referendum, we've had Article 50, we've had the EU Withdrawal Act that says legislatively we leave. So how can they put us through all these hoops and then go backwards? They are on a path. Everything is on a path to leave. They can't. It's too hard to stop it. They just can't swallow it because it's not what they want.
It's not what they want. Sums it up in many ways, Tristan. Thank you. And I get on Twitter. If you're a Democrat, the majority of the country can see it's a massive mess. For goodness sake, let's have a people's vote. Ford, if you're a Democrat, you'd respect the first referendum, and you certainly wouldn't want another one before it's even been implemented. You're listening to the Nigel Farrow Show here on LBC. It's 6:30 and time for the news with Lisa Rizzi. So Theresa May goes back to Brussels tomorrow ahead of a big summit on Thursday, and she's looking for assurances and reassurances on the backstop. What good that'll do her, I do not know. It is not legally binding. Donald Tusk has just told us the backstop is not up for renegotiation. They've banked that. It's in the bag as far as they're concerned. Alan says, Nigel, you say no backstop or there's no deal, but surely if we told them, right, there's no deal, then they wouldn't get the backstop at all. Yeah, Alan, I get that, mate, but she wants to get this deal through the House of Commons. The point I'm making is, and even Boris Johnson was pretty clear about this in the Telegraph today and on television yesterday. Even though Boris hates the deal, he says, look, if you bin the backstop, if you get rid of that, I will vote for it. And I believe there is a parliamentary majority now for this deal. I don't like it at all, but there's a majority for it if she gets rid of the backstop. She's not even going to try, and they are not going to reopen that conversation. But that, if I were her, would be my negotiating tactic. Kerry in Marlow says, is it possible she could come back to Parliament and give them two options, this deal or no deal? Well, Kerry, it is possible, and it's unlikely, of course, that the Parliament we have would have the vision or the imagination or the courage to imagine a fully independent United Kingdom. She might do it, although I don't think she somehow will. Those MPs asking for a second vote say the option should be May's deal or remain. How dare they when they won't accept her deal, says Leslie in Cheshire. Well, that's true. But, you know, there's a lot of people that want... You've got people voting against this deal who want to force a general election. People voting against this deal, potentially, who want a second referendum, and people voting against this deal because they're leavers who think it is actually wrong in every single way. She was on the verge of losing by about 220 votes, something that no government, I don't think, has ever done in history in terms of margins. Let's go to Harpenden and speak to Doreen, a new caller to the show. Good evening, Doreen.
Oh, good evening.
Welcome. So, is there anything Mrs May can come back with on Friday?
No, there's nothing. I'm absolutely fuming that there's no vote tomorrow, because I thought she would have been gone by then. I mean, surely her party must realise that the country no longer wants her. Are they that stupid? Hello?
Hello, go on.
Is the country that stupid? The country doesn't want her anymore.
Well,
No, look what's happening in France. The French people are now resistant. They've got all these immigrants over there. They're low-paid jobs. They've taken the jobs. Does she really want that to happen over here?
Well, I think the French... I mean, Doreen, the French discontent, I don't think this particular wave of discontent is to do with immigration. I think it's much more to do with taxes, isn't it? And the rich getting richer and ordinary working folk finding their lives aren't improving. A sort of a disconnect between perhaps Paris and the rest of France. But we have some of those symptoms here as well. So, Doreen, what's your message to Conservative backbench MPs?
But when she comes back, they aren't going to change their minds, are they, the EU?
No.
They need to all get together and put the letters in and get rid of her.
Get rid of her. Yep.
Yeah, believe in Brexit and tell them to stuff their deal where the sun don't shine.
Right, OK, there's a negotiating tactic from Doreen in Harpenden. Thank you. Have to say, I would much more favour your approach, Doreen, than that of Ollie Robbins. Made me laugh earlier, actually, when Theo Usherwood, LBC's political editor, was in, and he talked about Ollie Robbins being on our side. I wonder whether Ollie Robbins is actually on our side. I don't think he really is. Lorraine says, you don't get negotiating tactics, Nigel. Could this be one? Lorraine, it could be one. But what is it if she just wants to seek assurances and reassurances and didn't want to be humiliated by losing by 200 votes? If there's something really, really clever going on here, then I'm looking forward to seeing it. But I got the impression today this was a government completely out of control. Nobody really in charge. Nick says a similar thing. Is she trying to do a Cameron? Go to the EU and get concessions and assurances? Yeah. And look what good it did him, Nick. Almost none. Robert is calling from Leytonstone. Good evening, Robert.
Good evening there. Yes, I'm very glad that the vote has been called off. I think Theresa May should go over to the EU and she should tell them that we do not need a backstop, and I'll explain why we don't need one afterwards. She should also say, if you don't want the free trade component of it, then we take that out as well. All we need to do is get a deal that includes things like flights, citizenship of those UK people in the EU and vice versa.
So sort of neighbourly things, yeah.
Yeah, all those sort of things. And that deal, when it's done, at the end of 2020, when it comes to an end, the transition period, we're out totally. Now, Theresa May, and the problem is with the Conservatives actually running this exit, is that a lot of them are listening to economists and business people that only have a 3-year window of interest. The economists are paid by CEOs and directors of companies. They're only there to give the opinion of those people. And those people are only interested in about a 3-year term, same with many investors. And the reason is that their pay reward is on the profits of companies. Now, over the 2 or 3 years, while there's going to be this transition for businesses and a bit more paperwork, their profits may well be hit. So their reward, which can run into millions for some of these directors, like those 70 on the list of Sainsbury's and that, they are going to lose millions because of Brexit. They do not have the interest, the long-term interest of the workers who are going to be working for like 10, 15, 20 years. And that is the bit that we need to get right for those people. And
Mrs. May said today that if we left on WTO terms, it would hit the lower paid hardest. Was she right?
No, because of very simply, the people that are on things like benefits, those low paid are getting sort of universal credits or the equivalent of to support their standard of living. People in this country are guaranteed a minimum standard of living by our benefits system. And those that are on universal credit at the end of March can receive an adjustment that covers any additional costs.
I'm not going to get dug into all of that, Robert. Robert, in short, is she going to win the vote next week?
I hope not, and I don't think she actually will.
No, nor do I.
If it's right that there's 200, then no, it's not going to convert.
No, I agree. It'll all be over by Christmas, perhaps. Thank you very much indeed. A second referendum I get by text will set a precedent. The Scots will be screaming for one. Every close election result will have to be fought again, says Laurie from Plymouth. Evening, Nigel. If 48 letters are handed into the 22 committee very quickly, I can see Article 50 being revoked and Brexit stopped. I hope I'm wrong, but, says Vince in Exeter. But, of course, we did get the court ruling this morning from the European Court of Justice, and surprise, surprise, we're able, if we want, to just extend Article 50 without seeking anybody else's permission. Jim on Facebook says, your people voted and made May leader. Oh, no, they didn't. She's made the deal. If you don't like it, suck it up. No, Jim. No, Jim, I didn't want a Remainer to be leader. I simply can't believe a Remainer became leader. And look at what she has done. And Rob from York says, if we'd announced no deal 2 years ago when we triggered Article 50, businesses would have been prepared and adapted by now. We'd be ready to go and succeed in the world. The most damaging part of everything so far is indecision. Rob, if at any point the EU had thought we were going to go for no deal, that would have rushed us towards a more sensible free trade deal and some promises on how both the United Kingdom and the Republic of Ireland would have dealt with those border issues, not being suckered in to a backstop. Ben from Manchester has called me before. Good evening, Ben.
Good evening, Nigel.
Welcome back to the show. So, what concessions do you want to see?
I'd like to see the concession of basically a no-deal Brexit, to be honest.
Okay.
I mean, realistically, what concessions have we not already given up on our side?
Wow.
I mean,
I'm going to say, what more can we give, Ben, really?
Exactly. I mean, Theresa May got over there every single time, and every single time and just made this country poorer.
Yeah, we've given money, we've signed up to a deal that means part of our country could be annexed. Yeah, we can't give any more.
Exactly.
So, Ben, she does potentially, despite what's been said today, she could potentially go, couldn't she, and say, bin the backstop or it's no deal. But she's just not going to do it, is she?
Nope, but I think she should say exactly what Gerard Baden's been saying, and that's dump the deal.
Dump the deal. Well, bin the backstop. I'm all for binning the backstop, and I'm all for binning this deal. I've always been happy, Ben, for a free trade deal, but I'm afraid we never even asked for one. Thank you. John in Luton is a new caller. Good evening, John.
Hello there, Mr. Farage. But yeah, I'm listening to your show. First I'm listening to it start tonight, and I'm listening to it thinking, wait a second, I work for a car company, and this car company happens to be Jaguar. And basically, if you look online, my mates look online at work, and they might lose their jobs as well. There's quite a few people working in my factory. Jaguar, as soon as Brexit doesn't, if they don't agree with Brexit, what you're saying, they're saying, right, well, Jaguar's owned by foreigners anyway. They're going to move to either Lithuania or another Eastern European country. It's cheaper to make the car there. So Jaguar's not even going to be British anymore. It's going to be, well, you work it out for yourself, mate. They're basically turning around and they're not helping people at all, to be honest. I can lose my job. Most people in Coventry, I think, is where Jaguar.
Well, John, I mean, John, car firms come and car firms go. And we know that. I mean, Ford Transit left Southampton, went to Eastern Europe, and actually got European grant money to do it. So we know firms come and go. But John, but John, these threats, all right, about the car industry, we heard all of this at the time of the Euro. You know, if Britain doesn't join the Euro, the car manufacturers won't be in the UK, and they're still here, John.
I know, because they're turning around. If you saying, look at the comments. This is the local paper that's on my phone.
I'm losing your line, John. I'm losing your line. I'm going to try and get you back after the break on a fresh one. You're listening to the Nigel Farage Show here on LBC. It's 6:45 and time for the news headlines with Lisa Aziz. Theresa's heading back to Brussels looking for assurances and reassurances. What good that'll do her, I don't know. I think this deal is completely and utterly dead, and I think with it her premiership. That's my view. Now, John from Luton was a new caller on the line earlier. We lost the line. Johnny, you're back.
I'm back. Can you hear us now?
Yeah, that's better. So you're in the car industry. You work for Jaguar, I think you said. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Basically, I'm trying to explain something to you, but you keep. Well, I don't mind you butting in.
I literally could barely hear you. We've got a good line now, so please make your case.
Okay. What I'm saying is, if you look at online at the
news up in Coventry, the local newspaper, because you can get it on your phone. They're saying on their local newspaper that yes, they are going to be losing jobs there because basically they might close the factory down and move it to another country. Now, it might not happen, might happen. You're saying it might be okay, but I'm worried, and so are a lot of people up there worried, and I'm in Luton, I'm worried there because we work for a subcontractor that works for them.
John, I would just make this point to you as far as Jaguar was concerned. Number one, in terms of exports of Jaguar cars, of course, increasingly more of their cars go outside the European Union than go to the European Union. All right? Now, the risk, of course, is the risk of a no-deal Brexit, the risk of a WTO Brexit would be 10% tariffs on cars, yeah?
Yep.
But I tell you what, if sterling falls a little bit, that more than compensates for it. So I don't think in terms of selling to the markets, it's a big problem. In terms of location, John, the point I tried to make earlier, but we were struggling with the line, is that car firms come and go anyway. We saw full transit move to Eastern Europe. I do understand people's concerns, but actually with a firm like Jaguar, clearly the real opportunity for the future is not the European market. It's India, it's China, and it's the rest of the world. And if Jaguar is going to succeed with its export market, that's where it's going to do best.
Yeah. I agree with you on that score.
Yeah. All right, John, you're concerned. I understand it. I thank you very much indeed for your call. I'm pleased we got you back on a good line. Osama is calling from Dubai, a new caller. Good evening.
Good evening, Nigel. First-time caller.
Welcome.
But please, just bear with me, because I'm just trying to work out through the actual conundrum logically.
Okay, go on.
Now, 2016, the country voted leave.
Uh-huh.
So therefore, I may be wrong, but the starting point should have been all politicians having accepted that in reality, you completely leave the European Union, all the rules and regulations that you're tied to, and then work out a deal in which the country then decides what is its in interest to keep hold of. So your starting point is zero, work your way up. And it seems that both parties, including Theresa May's deal, was effectively to have assumed that we should stay in Europe and how much do we take out of the European Union regulations and institutions. So everybody's approaching this not from the result that happened in 2016, but the other way around, and assuming that, in fact, the people voted to remain.
So we started, Osama, so you're saying we started this whole thing, or the government started this whole thing, from the wrong place?
Yes, I agree, absolutely. And I'll give you an example. I mean, look, for me, I would have been a Remainer, and I am a Remainer. But in reality, what is more important, I think, for the country is the sense of fair play. And if I was to be given a second referendum, I'd vote out. Because there is a complete detachment by the members of Parliament from the will of the people and their constituents. They pay lip service for the word democracy and fair play. And the idea of a people's vote actually does a disservice to the people who voted out.
No, I think that's right. I think that's right. But Osama,
they're not part of the people.
You've given us. You've given me your analysis of why we are where we are. Do you think there's anything the Prime Minister could come back with on Friday lunchtime that would save the day for her deal?
No, because I suspect her gut instinct is actually to remain, and she'll always be trying to cling on to as much of the European Union as she possibly can get. That is not her fault. That is just her instinct and inclination.
Yeah, and she says it's her duty. It's her duty to leave the European Union. She never says she believes in it, does she?
She never says she believes in it. And in reality, I suspect if Jeremy Corbyn, hand on heart, and was not being blackmailed by his own party, is allowed to be given a free hand, he probably would have done a better job for this reason. Look, let's look at the cold light of day. For somebody like Corbyn to actually say that the European Union was going to save industrial jobs is absolutely nonsense. Because Rover back in 2005
he knows it.
Was allowed to sink because the European Union prohibited government subsidy to keep 10,000 people in their employment in London.
And Osama, EU grants help Ford Transit leave Southampton. Osama, I'm going to leave you there. I'm going to thank you very much indeed. Michael on Facebook says the EU will be running scared by this today. Michael, no, they won't be running scared of this today. And if this is a negotiating tactic by her, it's going to get her absolutely nowhere. Michael, my experience of the EU, and I will let you know because I'll be in Strasbourg on Wednesday, I'll be at the summit on Thursday, but my recent experiences of life in the EU is they are laughing at us. I think the whole world is laughing at us. I think today, and the way it played out, I think the whole thing is a national humiliation. That is my view. Nigel, twice in 2.5 years, 2 Conservative Prime Ministers have gone to Europe and come back with rubbish deals. Our politicians are no good, says Andy in Rotherham. Well, Andy, remember this. It was the European question that brought down Margaret Thatcher. It was the European question that ruined John Major's premiership. It was the European question that brought down David Cameron, and it's going to bring down this Prime Minister, and I think and sense sooner rather than later. Luke is a new caller from the Wirral. Good evening, Luke.
Hi, Nigel.
Welcome to the show. So, Luke, what do you want to see the Prime Minister come back with on Friday lunchtime?
I want to see a safe deal that will, unite our party, because I'm frankly scared that the Conservatives will fall, and we'll see Jeremy Corbyn in number 10.
OK, Luke. Well, I tell you what, and, Boris and others have made it clear, even though many in the Eurosceptic camp loathe this deal, loathe the money that's being given away and all the rest of it, if she got rid of the backstop, she'd get this deal through. Shouldn't she be going and saying, look, you can say what you like, but actually, this has to go or there is no deal? Isn't that, Luke, what I'm not saying she will, but isn't that what she needs to do?
I see that's what she needs to do to unite the party, but the peace agreement in Ireland, I think it's too valuable. I mean, my family are from Derry, and I think, a hard border in Ireland would...
But Luke, this is an incredibly emotive subject, but, the Taoiseach says he won't be building a hard border even in the event of a WTO Brexit. The British government say they won't be building a hard border, whatever the outcome. And I keep asking Mr. Barnier when I see him in the corridors of power, and he says they won't be building a hard border. What hard border?
I mean, they say this, but I don't see how you can have, a no trade deal between the EU and Britain without having a border of goods and services between the north and south.
But Luke, but Luke, let me just argue back quickly. I mean, at the moment there's a different currency, different tax rates, different excise duties. Life still goes on with those massive differences, doesn't it?
Well, they do, and it's functioning fine. But I've seen the fear, or I've heard the fear from family over there. People go to work in the south, they live in the north. Will that stop? It's not been answered particularly.
I just don't see why it should, and I think this has been put up and used, frankly, as almost a gigantic hoax. I just do not see why that should be. But that's the narrative the Prime Minister has bought into. Where's this all going to finish, Luke, in your view?
Theresa May's going to be out number 10.
Yep.
I'd say, Boris, maybe Esther McVeigh, David Davis, Michael Gove in number 10.
You're being very regional there. You're being very regional there, picking Esther McVeigh, aren't you?
Well, she's from my former MP in my constituency.
Yep.
Did a lot of good for the constituency. I'd like to see her there. I mean, I'm a Remainer, but I would value her as Prime Minister after what she did for the constituency.
I mean, Esther McVeigh, at the moment, is a big outsider, but then Mrs. Thatcher was a big outsider back in the mid-1970s. Do you really think Esther McVeigh could get through this?
She's going to have a tough battle against the likes of Mr. Johnson, Mr. Gove, but so was Theresa. She was an outsider. She's done it, and, well, for the first half of her premiership, she held a strong government. All
right, OK. No, Luke, it's a very, very interesting perspective. Thank you. Chris in Glasgow said, is Theresa the deceiver actually headed to Brussels to ask, what shall I say now? Chris, she's the elected Prime Minister of our once great nation. I've no doubt she will come back on Friday, having sought assurances and reassurances. Not that that will do her any good. You've been listening to The Nigel Farage Show. I'm back tomorrow night at 6. At 10 tonight, it's Tom Swarbrick. But up next, it's Ian Dale.
Nigel, thank you.